She told me I was always at work, so it shouldn't matter if she spent time with another guy. Then I found his hoodie in our closet. I removed myself from the lease, took what I paid for, and walked away. She ended up responsible for the bills and eventually evicted. My name is Alex. I am 31, and I work in operations for a regional logistics company. I live in a large metro area, my weeks are long, and most of my life runs on schedules and checklists. I am not dramatic, and I do not enjoy chaos. My girlfriend Jenna is 29. We have been together just over 3 years and lived together for 2. We shared an apartment, a lease, and a general understanding that we were building towards something stable. No kids, no shared accounts, but plenty of shared furniture and routines. From the outside, our relationship looked functional. Inside, it ran on a lot of friction. Jenna liked intensity and attention. I liked predictability and follow-through. That difference stayed manageable as long as I was around enough to absorb it. Work changed that. I took a promotion that meant longer hours and more responsibility. I was upfront about it. I explained what it would mean and why it mattered. She said she understood, but her version of understanding usually expired the moment she felt inconvenienced. That was when her friend from college started coming up in conversation again. Ryan. Same age, same city, same vague history. She framed it as harmless. Old friends reconnecting. I did not panic. I asked reasonable questions and set simple boundaries. Her response was dismissive. She said I was always at work anyway, and implied I was being controlling for even asking. She had a talent for turning normal concerns into personal flaws if they came from me. I noticed small changes after that. Her phone was always face down. Her mood shifted when I walked into a room. She started staying out later and answering questions with attitude instead of facts. When I pressed, she accused me of interrogating her. I did not snoop. I did not yell. I paid my share of the rent, kept the apartment running, and waited to see if behavior matched the reassurances she kept giving. Then one night, I was putting laundry away and found a hoodie that was not mine. It was oversized, worn in, and smelled like a different detergent. It was folded neatly in our closet like it belonged there. That was the moment I stopped explaining things to myself. I stood there for a full minute holding that hoodie, just letting the obvious land without trying to soften it. It did not belong to me. It did not belong in our apartment. And it did not end up there by accident. When Jenna got home, I did not raise my voice. I set the hoodie on the kitchen counter and asked her to explain why another man's clothes were in our closet. She looked annoyed before she looked guilty, which told me everything about the order of her priorities. She said I was overreacting. She said it was not a big deal. She said Ryan had crashed on the couch once and left it behind. Then she pivoted fast into attack mode. She told me I was never home anyway and asked what difference it made who she spent time with. There was no apology, no attempt to understand why this crossed a line. Just attitude and defensiveness wrapped in sarcasm. She had that tone she uses when she thinks she has already won the argument and is just waiting for me to shut up. I asked a simple follow-up. Why was it washed and folded in our closet instead of tossed in a bag or left by the door? She shrugged and said she was being nice. Then she told me I should be grateful she was honest. That was when I realized the conversation was not about the hoodie. It was about control. She wanted to do whatever she wanted and have me accept it quietly because I paid bills and stayed busy. I told her calmly that I was not comfortable with this and that something had to change immediately. She laughed and said if I did not like it, I could leave. She said the apartment was basically hers anyway since she lived there full-time. She thought that was a power move. What she did not realize was that the lease was in my name because my credit was better when we moved in. She also did not realize how closely I track what I pay for and what I do not. I went to bed that night without arguing further, not because I agreed with her, but because I had already made a decision. The next morning I left for work like normal. I did not confront her again, and I did not hint at what I was planning. Jenna interpreted my silence as retreat. She texted me mid-morning asking if I was done being dramatic yet. I was not. I was just being efficient. On my lunch break, I pulled up the lease documents and the payment history. The lease was solely in my name. I had added her as an occupant, not a tenant. Every rent payment, security deposit, and utility setup came from my account. The couch, the bed, the TV, the kitchen stuff, all purchased by me and saved in a folder I keep for exactly this kind of situation. That folder exists because I do not like surprises. I called the leasing office and asked what the process was to transfer or terminate given my circumstances. I did not rant. I did not overshare. I explained that I would be vacating and needed to know my options. They were helpful in that very neutral, policy-driven way. By the end of the call, I knew exactly what I could do and how fast I could do it. That evening, Jenna was in a great mood. She was chatty, dismissive, and overly casual, like someone who thought the argument was over because she had decided it was. She mentioned Ryan again, just to poke at me, and asked if I was going to be weird about it forever. I told her no. I told her I had things handled. She smirked and said good, because she was not changing her life just because I was insecure. That night after she fell asleep, I started packing my things quietly. Not everything, just what mattered and what I had paid for. Clothes, electronics, important documents. I took pictures of the apartment as it was, just in case. I slept a few hours, woke up before dawn, loaded my car, and left my keys on the counter. By noon the next day, the lease transfer paperwork was submitted. By the end of the week, it was finalized. Jenna did not realize what was happening until the rent reminder email hit her inbox, and mine did not. That was when my phone started blowing up. At first, the messages were confused. Jenna asked why she got a notice about the lease. She asked if it was a mistake. She asked if I had talked to the office without her. I did not respond immediately because I was in meetings and because none of those questions deserved urgency. When I finally replied, I kept it short. I told her I had removed myself from the lease and transferred responsibility. I told her she now needed to coordinate directly with management. I did not apologize, and I did not justify it beyond that. She exploded. The tone flipped from confusion to rage in seconds. She accused me of being petty. She said I blindsided her. She said normal couples talk through problems instead of pulling legal stunts. She said I was trying to punish her for having friends. I reminded her calmly that she told me I could leave if I did not like how things were. I told her I took her at her word. That only made her angrier. She demanded I come back and fix it. She said she could not afford the place on her own. She said Ryan was between jobs and crashing with friends, so he could not help. That detail landed exactly how you think it did. I told her that her finances were no longer my responsibility and that I had already removed everything I paid for. She went room by room on FaceTime, pointing out missing items like it was a hostage video. Couch gone. TV gone. Bed frame gone. Even the microwave. She called me selfish. She called me heartless. She told me I ruined her life over a hoodie. I pointed out that the hoodie was just the moment I stopped ignoring reality. I told her she made her choices and I made mine. I also told her I would not be discussing this further. She threatened to tell everyone I abandoned her. I told her she was free to explain whatever version she wanted and that I would not argue publicly. After that, I blocked her. Phone, messages, social media. Not to punish her, but because there was nothing left to resolve and I was not going to stay available for abuse disguised as conversation. Over the next few weeks, I heard bits and pieces through mutual friends. Late rent notices. Arguments with the leasing office. Promises she could not keep. Ryan disappearing when things got real. I stayed quiet and stayed gone. The eviction notice came about a month later. Once I blocked Jenna, information reached me indirectly. Mutual friends. Co-workers who overlapped socially. People texting me cautiously, like they were stepping onto thin ice. Blocking her did not end the situation. It just removed me from the center of it. Without direct access to me, her story sharpened. At first, she told people I vanished overnight, that I packed up and disappeared without warning. Later, it shifted into me cutting her off financially and leaving her stranded. Blocking me became proof, in her version, that I was cold and manipulative rather than just done. What she left out was the timeline. The conversations she dismissed. The moment she laughed and told me I could leave if I did not like how things were. She framed the outcome as sudden because acknowledging the buildup would have required accountability. The actual sequence was slower and more predictable. She ignored emails from the leasing office. She paid partial rent and argued deadlines. She told people she was handling it while clearly not handling it. She assumed something would give because something always had before. Ryan did not step in. Once the situation shifted from hanging out to responsibility, he became inconsistent. Friends offered couches for a night or two, but nobody wanted to inherit a lease or unpaid rent. Support evaporated once it required commitment. By the time the eviction notice arrived, most of her options were already gone. I found out because someone forwarded me a screenshot asking if it was real. It was. I did not feel happy about it. I felt relieved. Not because she was struggling, but because I was no longer absorbing the consequences of decisions I did not make. Watching it unfold from a distance confirmed that leaving was the only realistic option. Blocking Jenna meant silence, but it did not mean peace right away. The ripple effects lasted longer than I expected. People wanted context. Some wanted reassurance that I was not the villain she described. Others wanted me to soften my version so they could stay neutral without discomfort. I did not do that. When asked, I stuck to the same explanation. I set boundaries. She dismissed them. I removed myself. Anything beyond that felt like unnecessary negotiation over facts that were already settled. A few people tried to reconnect us. They said she was embarrassed. They said she was struggling. They said she had learned her lesson. I listened and declined every time. Growth that appears only after consequences is not something I gamble my stability on. She tried to reach me through others more than once. One message framed as closure, another framed as needing help. Both assumed access to me was still available if she asked indirectly. That part stood out. Even then, the framing was about my role in stabilizing her situation, not about repairing trust or acknowledging harm, just about stepping back in to manage the fallout. Blocking her stopped being something I justified and started being something I protected. The quiet that followed was not empty. It was restorative. My days felt lighter. My thoughts were not constantly redirected towards someone else's emotional weather. Distance did not make me miss her. It clarified how unbalanced things had been. Some people do not miss you. They miss the version of you that made their life easier. A few weeks after the eviction, the social fallout settled into something quieter but more revealing. People stopped asking questions and started forming conclusions. Who stayed in touch told me more than anything anyone said out loud. Some friends drifted away completely, not because they believed her version outright, but because my refusal to engage made things inconvenient. I was not giving them drama to pass around or details to balance the scales. I was just done. That made people uncomfortable. Others pulled closer. They admitted they had seen the imbalance before, but never knew how to name it. One friend told me he always wondered how I stayed so calm when Jenna talked to me the way she did. I told him calm is easier than arguing with someone who treats every boundary like a challenge. That comment stuck with me because I realized how much of my energy had gone into staying even, not fixing things, not growing together, just preventing blow-ups and smoothing edges so daily life could function. Around that time, I ran into Ryan unexpectedly at a bar with coworkers. He looked surprised to see me and even more uncomfortable. We exchanged a stiff nod. He left shortly after. That interaction confirmed something I already suspected. Whatever confidence he had when things were casual disappeared once there were consequences attached. He was never competing with me. He was benefiting from the situation I maintained. I thought about reaching out to explain my side or clear the air. I did not. Closure does not require participation from people who were fine with the confusion. What surprised me most was how little I felt after all of it. No urge to check her social media. No late-night second-guessing. Just a steady sense that something unstable had finally stopped shaking my life. I started rebuilding routines that had nothing to do with accommodating someone else. Gym in the mornings. Cooking meals I liked. Leaving work when I was done instead of rushing home to manage tension. The space left behind was not empty. It was usable. That was when I realized I had not lost a relationship. I had exited a system where my role was to absorb impact so someone else could stay comfortable. Time added perspective in a way distance alone could not. Once the noise died down, I started replaying earlier moments with clearer eyes. Not to punish myself, but to understand where I had participated in something that was never sustainable. There were signs I ignored because they were inconvenient. The way Jenna framed every disagreement as an attack. How compromise always meant I adjusted, and she evaluated whether it was enough. How my long hours at work were treated as a flaw instead of a contribution to the life we were sharing. I used to tell myself that relationships require patience, that everyone has rough edges. What I avoided admitting was that patience becomes self-erasure if it only flows one direction. I also noticed how often I had been positioned as the stabilizer. If something went wrong, I was expected to fix it. If she was upset, I was expected to absorb it. If plans fell apart, I was expected to reorganize everything so she did not feel the impact. That dynamic did not start with Ryan. He just exposed it. A friend asked me if I would do anything differently if I could go back. The answer surprised me. I said I would have left earlier. Not because I hate her or because of pride, but because clarity arrived long before action did. Staying taught her that dismissing me had no cost. Leaving taught me that enforcing boundaries does not require permission. Occasionally someone would update me on how she was doing. New place, new roommate, new story. Each update reinforced the same pattern. Chaos followed by reinvention without accountability. I stopped asking follow-up questions. What stayed with me was how quickly my nervous system recalibrated once the situation was over. I had not realized how tense I had been living. How alert. How prepared for friction. Calm did not feel boring. It felt earned. That realization carried into other areas of my life. Work conversations got clearer. Friendships got simpler. I stopped negotiating basic respect anywhere I went. The breakup stopped being something that happened to me and started being something I chose. That distinction mattered more than closure. By the time I stopped thinking about Jenna daily, I knew I had fully exited the relationship, not just physically but mentally. The last loose threads tied themselves off without much effort on my part. Mutual friends stopped bringing her up once it became clear I was not interested in postmortems. The ones who stayed understood that I was not bitter. I was resolved. What surprised me was how often people framed my decision as extreme. Leaving. Transferring the lease. Taking what I paid for. Blocking contact. From the outside it looked harsh. From the inside it felt proportionate. I realized how conditioned people are to expect men to absorb discomfort indefinitely. To stay calm. To keep paying. To keep explaining. When you stop doing that, it reads as cruelty instead of self-respect. I did not date for a while. Not because I was damaged, but because I wanted to reset my baseline. I paid attention to how my body reacted to silence and autonomy. No dread when my phone buzzed. No bracing before walking through a door. No rehearsing conversations in my head. That became my new standard. Eventually, I did meet someone new. Slowly. Casually. No shared keys. No shared lease. No rushing into roles. What stood out immediately was how little effort it took to maintain peace. Disagreements stayed contained. Boundaries were acknowledged without debate. It made the contrast unavoidable. I stopped framing my past relationship as a lesson about betrayal and started seeing it as a lesson about alignment. Jenna did not betray me once. She consistently showed me who she was, and I delayed believing her because I was invested in the version that required less disruption. That delay cost time and energy. Leaving returned both. The eviction stopped being a dramatic event in my memory and became a data point. A predictable outcome of choices made by someone who assumed consequences were optional. I did not feel vindicated. I felt done. There is a difference. That difference is what allowed me to move forward without carrying resentment or nostalgia. Just information. And information, used properly, changes behavior. The resolution did not come with a big conversation or a final message. It came quietly, over time, as my life stabilized in ways I no longer questioned. The chaos did not follow me. That alone told me everything I needed to know. Jenna eventually stopped coming up in conversation entirely. Not because people forgot, but because there was nothing left to discuss. Her situation changed a few times. New apartment. New relationship. New explanations. None of it intersected with my life anymore, and I made sure it stayed that way. What stayed with me was the clarity. I learned that boundaries are not ultimatums. They are information. They tell people how access to you works. When someone ignores that information, the correct response is not to repeat it louder. It is to remove access. For a long time, I thought being reasonable meant staying flexible. What I learned instead is that being reasonable also means knowing when flexibility turns into self-neglect. I was not punishing her by leaving. I was correcting my own behavior. Looking back, the hoodie was never the real issue. It was just the moment the imbalance became impossible to deny. Everything after that followed naturally once I stopped negotiating with reality. I do not regret how things ended. I regret how long I stayed once it was clear they should. That is the part one own. If there is any advice buried in this, it is simple. Pay attention to how often you are asked to be understanding while your own needs are minimized. Pay attention to how often peace depends on your silence. That is not compromise. That is conditioning. Walking away did not make me cold. It made me honest. And honesty, especially with yourself, tends to clean up messes faster than any argument ever could.
For me, it took me an entire year to gain 5 pounds of muscle. The whole year.
Wow. You know what's so funny is, like, as a man, when I broach this subject with the women in my life and they tell me they're worried about bulking up, so I'm like, you understand, like, I've been training for like 20 years.
You're like trying to get bulky, and you're like, it's hard.
It's funny. I'm like, they come out of nowhere like, well, if I do this for like even a few months, I'm just going to get so big and bulky. I'm like, it is so hard to put on muscle. It just doesn't happen that way.
It's so hard. And I think that women, so what happens sometimes is women will build muscle, but they won't be losing the fat on top of the muscle. So they'll feel overall bigger because they're gaining overall mass, even though their body composition has improved. Their ratio of lean mass to fat mass has improved, but they feel like they're overall bigger. So that's where diet comes in. And because a lot of people lean on exercise, I think, way too much to like lose fat and lose weight. And they're not being considerate of how they're eating. And so they're gaining fat because they're in a calorie surplus, and they're also building muscle. So they feel bigger overall. So I think it's kind of two separate conversations that you need to have with yourself, is like, how am I eating? And then also, how am I training to build muscle?
I also think women in particular, not to be sexist here, but they're afraid of the scale. And when you start adding more muscle and then the scale goes up because the muscle weighs more than the fat, you think, oh, I'm gaining weight, which in my opinion is not a bad thing if you're building lean muscle.